Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. My name is David Mathis, trustee, Mohawk Valley Community College, New York, chair-elect of ACCT, and chair of the Public Policy and Advocacy Committee. I want to welcome you to ACCT's latest Action in Washington Live. Had some questions this morning about how I might dress, as most of you know. When you're doing online events. I haven't worn a suit, jacket, or a suit or tie since March. So I decided that I would continue to dress the way I am. But we do have one of our panelists who got up this morning and put on a shirt and tie. So you'll be seeing him in a few minutes. These are very trying times. As Thomas Paine would say, these are times that try men's souls. We have so much going on around the country and in Washington, and we've had our excellent staff who are going to bring to you as much information as you can take. I spent this last hour or so listening to the funeral service for one of our strong supporters of public education and higher education, John Lewis. So this has been a very trying time for all of us. And at this time, I'm going to turn over our activities to Katie, who will give you the beginning of our ACCT's latest Action in Washington. Thank you for joining. Katie.
Thanks so much, Dave, for kicking us off with that thoughtful introduction. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining. My name is Katie Brown, and I'm Director of Government Relations here at ACCT. And I'll be presenting to you all today along with my colleagues, Ji-Heng Lee, who is ACCT's Senior Vice President, and José Miranda, ACCT's Senior Government Relations Associate. As you'll see on the screen, we put up an agenda for today's presentation just to let you know what we'll be covering today. We'll start by talking through recent administrative actions by the Department of Education, and then we'll talk you through some notable grant opportunities that have come through both the Department of Education and the Department of Labor in the last couple of months. And then we will talk you through the interesting things that are happening on Capitol Hill with Congress and as they relate to higher education. I also wanted to just note before I get started that if you have a question for us during the presentation today, you can feel free to ask it. There's a bar at the bottom of your screen where you'll see a Q&A function that you should be able to type in your questions. And we'll do our best to get to your questions either throughout the presentation or at the end of the presentation. And so we'll dive right in with some recent administrative actions from the Department of Education that are of interest to you all. As you know, on May 6th, Education Secretary DeVos formally announced long-awaited final regulations concerning sexual harassment under Title IX of the Higher Education Act. And it's important to note that her announcement of these regulations was the culmination of a process that began nearly 3 years ago in 2017, when the department withdrew Obama administration guidance on how campuses should handle incidents of sexual misconduct. A year later, in 2018, the Education Department issued a notice of proposed rulemaking on Title IX, signaling its intent to require higher education institutions to ensure more due process for students accused of misconduct. So it's safe to say we've all been waiting for these final regulations for quite a while. And the regulations that were announced in May, it's important to note that there's a range of new requirements for institutions, including a requirement that the Title IX complaint process at an institution involve multiple unbiased officials rather than allowing for one individual to manage complaints. Additionally, under the regulations, colleges are required to establish protocols for live hearings as part of their grievance procedures that include cross-examinations and other protocols relating to involved parties and witnesses. In addition, colleges are required to train all of their personnel involved in Title IX process and make those training materials publicly available through their websites. And that's just a couple of points of the regulations. As you all know, and I'm sure have read, these regulations have been met with a lot of criticism and pushback by a large number of groups, including women's advocacy groups and legal advisors. It's also been noted that compliance for this comprehensive rule is especially difficult given the pandemic-driven revenue loss that a lot of institutions are currently facing. And I didn't note this before, but I should say the department, when issuing the regulations, gave colleges until August 14th to comply, which is about a 3-month window, which is a tight turnaround for these comprehensive regulations. And the regulations have been challenged in court since they've been issued by at least 18 attorneys general who are seeking the immediate delay of the rule. But as it stands right now, no decisions to block the rule have been handed down yet, and institutions are continuing to work on compliance. And we, along with other higher education organizations, will be, working diligently to provide you with the resources that you need as you go through the compliance process or work with others who are. Next, we have seen current regulations being issued from ICE and the Department of Homeland Security around international students that I'm sure you've all been paying attention to. As you all know, under normal circumstances, international students are only permitted to take one online course per semester, with the rest of their courses being required to be in person. However, considering the pandemic that took hold of the US in March, the department and the administration had issued guidance allowing international students to remain in the US while taking a fully online course load without jeopardizing their immigration status. Which is why it was surprising to many institutions and students that on July 6th, the Department of Homeland Security issued a policy directive that would require both new and continuing international students to be enrolled in in-person classes in the fall or face deportation. The rule and the administrative action also put dates in place that institutions would have to report whether or not they were going to be requiring in-person instruction, and they would have needed to report that to the department by middle of July, which a lot of institutions weren't prepared to do because there's still, a lot of conversations about how institutions are going to deliver their coursework in the fall. So immediately after the rule was issued, we at ACCT, along with our other partners and higher education organizations, sent a letter to the Department of Homeland Security asking them to reconsider. Additionally, Harvard and MIT filed a lawsuit against the rule, and as a result, the administration agreed to withdraw the regulation on July 15th, which meant that everything reverted back to the March guidance, which allowed for international students to stay in the US while taking online courses, which was good news. However, after the rule was rescinded, we were all still expecting some additional guidance from the department, potentially around international students. And on July 24th, ICE updated their guidance again, stating that new international students cannot come to the US to attend online courses. But that doesn't apply to continuing international students. Obviously, higher education groups have expressed their discontent with this guidance, and the goal was to have all international students, regardless of if they were new or incoming or continuing, to be able to take online courses and not jeopardize their immigration status. So we're still following this closely, and we'll be releasing new information as it comes. And then lastly for me, I just wanted to walk you all through a couple of grant opportunities that have come out of the Department of Education and the Department of Labor. The first one is called the Reimagining Workforce Preparation Grant Program, and the Education Department announced the launch of this grant program on June 23rd. The funding that is available for this grant is $127.5 million total. And it's actually funded by using 1% of the CARES Act funding, which was a stimulus bill passed by Congress, which we'll talk about later. And the goal of the grant is to expand educational opportunities through short-term career pathways or sector-based education and training programs. What's unique about this program is that even though it's coming from the Department of Education, the grants are actually going to states and then to state workforce boards rather than directly to institutions of higher education, but state workforce boards can work and are encouraged to work with other partners to carry out these grants, which means they can work with community colleges. And the deadline to apply for the grant is August 24th. There's been a lot of resources put out by the Department of Education on the grant, and we've also put out some resources as well. And then the last grant I'll mention is called the Strengthening Community College Training Grant Program. This is a grant program that was approved and authorized by Congress in the FY20 appropriations process. And the Department of Labor just announced the availability of the funding for this grant, which is total $40 million, which will be given out to community colleges to prepare individuals for in-demand jobs. Community colleges can either apply as a single institution or as a consortium. The maximum grant for a community college to get as an individual college is $2 million. If a college applies as a regional consortia, it's $5 million. The minimum grant would be $1 million either way. The Department of Labor intends to make approximately 8 to 16 grants, and the grant applications must show that colleges are working in partnership with industry to make more training opportunities available to people so we can get, folks back to work. Each grant application must specify how it will address 4 core elements, including evidence-based design, sector strategies, enhanced career pathway programs, and strategic alignment within the workforce system. And the deadline for applications for that program is August 8th at 4 p.m. And again, we'll have resources and additional information come your way as the Department of Labor updates it. And Jose, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Katie. And before we move forward, I just want to say, once again, thank you to everyone tuning in. We have people from all over the country. As you logged in, you probably saw a poll. So we're going to release the results of the poll. You can see that we have folks from different roles at institutions and people from different regions as well. So we're glad to have you here. And as always, we're here to serve you. Just to reference, we have a lot of information on our website. We continuously send out our law alerts. So if you want to stay updated on what is happening here in Washington, D.C., please make sure you sign up for our law alerts. As an example, since Katie mentioned the Title IX rule, we have an article that was written by our counsel here at ACCT detailing the changes from the rule. You can find that on our website, now.acct.org, as in addition to many, many other resources. Now, in terms of, we're going to shift from administrative actions to congressional actions. And as you may know, with the fiscal year ending on September 30th, Congress is going to have to take action to avoid either a full or partial shutdown before that. However, with the COVID pandemic happening, Congress's attention has been mostly occupied by addressing it since March. That being said, there has been some action in Congress. We still need to move through a regular appropriation process in order to avoid a partial shutdown. On the Senate side, the process is on hold. And given that the Appropriations Committee is in the midst of a negotiation for a fourth stimulus legislation, we don't foresee that resuming anytime soon, at least not before they leave for the August recess. On the House side, though, there has been a lot of action. It's been a very, very active month for the House Appropriations Committee. They actually moved all 12 of their bills out of committee. And on July 13th, they marked up the Labor, Health and Human Services, Education and Related Agencies bill favorably out of committee on a party line vote. That bill is currently being debated on the House floor as part of a 6-bill minibus package, and it is expected to have a vote tomorrow. Currently, they're debating over 300 amendments. But we're going to go over some of the highlights for the House Appropriations bill. First and foremost, the bill provides modest increases, and I just want to note for context that the spending caps for this year were agreed 2 years ago. And as usual, the first year there was a significant increase, which is how we saw a lot of big increases to various programs last year. But the second year, it's very, very minimal increases. And so we were expecting to see a lot of programs level funded. Luckily, a lot of our programs received modest increases, and that's a result of the committee moving some funds through emergency appropriations as a result of the pandemic. So the Department of Education received a $760 million increase to their discretionary funding. And one thing that the bill does, and I want to highlight that is separate from its funding, is it authorizes Second Chance Pell. Second Chance Pell has been one of our big priorities for a very long time. The bill does authorize it. It has to go still through the Senate and a conference process, but it's a very positive news for us, positive development in that area. In terms of other key funding highlights for that relate to institutions, I just want to say the maximum Pell Grant received an increase of $150 to $6,495. There was also an increase to other financial aid programs such as the Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant and for a work study, and particularly for our community colleges, the Strengthening Institutions program received a $6 million increase as well. Our Title III and Title V programs that provide support to HBCUs and MSIs also receive modest increases ranging from 5 to 8%. And the other parts that I want to highlight is the Strengthening Community College grants, which Katie mentioned earlier, currently has grant applications open, received an increase of $10 million from $40 to $50 million in FY21. There were also increases for the adult education state grants, as well as the CTE state grants. All of this information you can find on our website, through our law alerts, and through other documents that we put on, resources we put on our website. Now I'm gonna turn it over to Jihang, and before I turn it over to Jihang to talk about the current status of negotiations for a fourth stimulus bill, I just wanna put a lay of the land. Congress has passed several bills in response to the coronavirus. The most notable one for us was the CARES Act, which was signed into law in March. It provided funding both for our institutions and our students in the form of a higher education emergency relief fund. But as you all know, this money, while very, very useful and needed, has not been enough. And we've also taken a lot of lessons from this law, whether it was its implementation or the way the funds were distributed. So as we move forward on a fourth stimulus legislation, ACCT has been working really hard on making sure that whatever new law comes, it learns from the mistakes of the CARES Act and is favorable to community colleges and our students. Jihang, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Katie and Dave, for especially for your introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jihang Lee. I'm the Senior Vice President at ACCT. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the Community College Stimulus 4 priorities, and then we'll give you a little bit of update for stimulus activity that occurred in the House with the HEROES Act and also with the Senate. And obviously, we'll give you a quick update on what's going on with the Senate negotiations. One of our top asks, obviously, is for some additional aid for higher education. As part of our ask, we were asking for globally $74 billion across all of higher education with a minimum ask of approximately $46 billion. And as Congress decides how to distribute those funds, we are asking Congress to utilize a headcount formula versus a FTE formula. And this is especially in light of the fact that many of our community college students are not full-time students, or rather part-time students. The other thing that we did know from the CARES Act was that a lot of the language that was instituted for the CARES Act, especially around institutional funds, the share of the funds that institutions received, not for the students, it was relatively limiting, but also we wanted broader flexibility to encompass loss of revenue and loss of state revenue or state resources, because we do know one of the things that may transpire, or we're hopeful it won't, is that states may just disinvest in higher education at the state level. And so we want to ensure that colleges, as they receive these resources, can offset those losses. We're also asking for at least $1 billion over a 2-year period for a community college training grant program. It's similar to what was authorized, appropriated in the appropriations bills, but we do think it's an appropriate time given where we are with the unemployment rate. I'm sure many of you saw the 1.4 million individuals file for unemployment in the past week, and we continue to want to advocate on behalf of our institutions to get resources to lead the effort to get individuals back to work. We're also seeking some enhancements relative to higher education tax credits for training opportunities. There's some bills in Congress that advance this, and so we're hopeful that some form of additional tax credits would be advanced. Some of you all know that in the CARES Act, one of the most popular programs was a program called the Paycheck Protection Program. This is primarily based for nonprofits and businesses, smaller businesses. And one of the things that we also learned was that public nonprofit institutions that applied were not eligible to participate in the Paycheck Protection Program. Although I do know that at least 1 or 2 colleges did apply, but their banks, for the most part, denied the eligibility of our institutions. We are asking for our institution to be able to participate in that program going forward, as if I believe there's some resources still available in the program, and if they replenish that pot, that our institutions then can therefore participate in the future. Additionally, we're asking public institutions be made eligible for their Employee Retention and Family Medical Leave Act tax credits. We think that's relatively important in this time period. We're also asking, because one of the things that we're seeking is some additional federal student aid. One of the things we do know is that students are still, especially with the lack of jobs available right now, and especially since some of our students are in the service industry, they have had reduced incomes. So we're looking for some additional student aid enhancement. And also we're calling on Congress to look into extending or figuring out what to do relative to the student loan. Many students, or actually all students, their student loans were paused in the CARES Act, and that pause ends on September 30th. So therefore we have great concerns that once October 1st hit, that many students may not be able to pay off their debt or start repayment, and ultimately may default. So the status of Stimulus 4, since we passed the CARES Act in March, we've been working, ACCT along with AACC, our sister association, we've been pushing heavily on various pieces of our priorities on the previous slide. On May 15th, the House Democrats did pass their version of the Stimulus 4, which was called the HEROES Act. It was largely on a party line vote. The major pieces of the bill that are important for community colleges, one, it contained $27 billion for public higher education. That is a sizable increase for, it basically is, I believe, is about a 2.5 times what we received in CARES for public institutions. And most importantly for community colleges, besides just the money, is that the funds would be allocated based upon a 0.75 Pell Grant recipients and a 0.25 total headcount for students. That in and of itself does increase our share of funds from approximately around 28%. I believe it pushed us up almost up to 40% of the resources for Stimulus 4. In addition, the funds were made more flexible for institutions that we can use these resources to defray lost revenue and also loss of state resources. Additionally, they also clarified that colleges can give emergency grant funding to all students, including international DACA recipients, adult basic ed, and at their discretion, and this would be up to each individual institution how they would distribute these resources. Okay, next slide. While the House moved pretty quickly, about a month and a half after the CARES Act was passed, the Senate has been on a little bit more of a deliberate pace. On June 30th, the House, the Senate Democrats led by Minority Leader Schumer and the ranking member of the Help Committee, Patty Murray, introduced the Coronavirus Child Care and Education Relief Act. This bill primarily dealt with just childcare, as it's in the title, and education. It provided $132 billion for stabilization funding for public colleges and universities. And also this bill also utilizes a formula of 0.75 for Pell Grant recipients and 0.25 for total headcount, which is exactly what was provided in HEROES. Like HEROES, it does also allow institutions to utilize the emergency grant funding to all students, including international, DACA, adult basic ed, and also non-credit students. The bill also included a $2 billion fund for a community college and industry partnership program. This is also something that we've been strongly supportive of, and $1 billion for adult education and literacy programs and career and technical education grants. This is obviously what the Senate Democrats wanted, and this has been kind of their marker in the sand while they waited for Majority Leader McConnell and Chairman Blunt to move their appropriation stimulus requests through. Earlier this week, earlier this week, the Senate Republicans introduced various bills that dealt with stimulus Part 4. Of note is Senator Blunt introduced a piece of a bill that included $29.1 billion for the Higher Education Relief Fund. As many of you know, that's the ALEC fund that was created under the CARES Act. They did a couple of different things. Number one is they provided $4.7 billion for institutions, but they actually changed the formula. As you recall, in the CARES Act, it was 0.75 and 0.25 Pell FTE and non-Pell FTE. They actually changed it around to 90% based upon Pell Grant FTE and 10% non-Pell FTE. They did not utilize a headcount, even with our strong advocacy efforts in the Senate for the last couple of months. What I can note for all of you is that even utilizing this 90-10 formula, it does allow, it does increase the community college to your public share of resources under the HERF funds by about 2 to 3%. So it is not insignificant in terms of the total receipt for our institutions. It also provides $2.9 billion for additional resources for historically Black colleges and universities and our minority serving institutions, such as Hispanic serving institutions, predominantly Black institutions, and our Anakeses and tribal colleges. It also creates a separate line item of $1.5 billion for institutions most in need of assistance. For those of you who recall, in the CARES Act, there was a pot of resources available to institutions that had small share that received less than $500,000. We believe that this is a pot that is similar to that. But obviously there was some implementation hangups with that, what we call the top off the program, because we had some institutions receive a significant amount of resources, but they had very few students. Additionally, this bill also leaves the student eligibility in place for the emergency grants for the Education Secretary to determine. It is, so we believe that if this passed, the rules that are outlined relative to the CARES Act, especially by the interim final rule that was distributed by the Department of Education, would be the guidance that would go back to our institution in terms of aid to students. In addition, it contains a 5-year liability shield for institutions, for educational institutions. And I think that is that's been one of our asks also, is just creating a liability waiver for during this period to ensure that our institutions are not hit with significant amount of lawsuits as they plan to reopen and have students on campus. It also, led by Senator Lamar Alexander, Chairman Alexander introduced a bill that would consolidate the student loan repayments into two different options, but it would not extend the CARES Act student loan relief. So therefore, starting October 1st, students would ultimately be placed in two different type of repayment options going forward if they were struggling, a struggling borrower. Next slide. That is kind of our update for our stimulus legislation. These are our resources. We encourage you to visit us at these two sections of our website, and we'll be sharing this PowerPoint presentation afterwards. During our conversation today, we've received a number of questions, so we're going to try to address them as they come in. If you have additional questions, you can submit them as we go through. So what's the first question, Katie?
Sure. So the first question came into us via email before the presentation, and it was about what assistance the federal government would give to states, cities, and localities to help compensate for their loss of revenue due to COVID. So Jihang, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the conversation around stimulus 4 and how it relates to the possibility of the federal government approving funding for states and cities.
Yes, so ACCT has been supportive of efforts that's being led by the National Governors Association to provide resources to states. For an example, I believe NGA's request was somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 billion for states and localities. The HEROES Act included $1 trillion for states and localities. What we do know is that even with CARES, and we expect this to be done, if there's not a strong enough maintenance of effort language in the final bill for this fourth round, is that states will largely cut our funding based upon the amount of money that we received in the stimulus legislation. And it's actually even worse because in CARES, institutions receive, let's say, $100. $50 had to go to students, $50 were retained for institutional purposes, but some states just said, well, you got $100, so therefore we're going to take $100 from your allocation. But in reality, we didn't actually get to keep any of the $50 that went to students. So therefore, that was kind of an educational exercise that I know many of our community college leaders had to do with their state elected officials. But yes, we are trying to continue to push to ensure that there's resources available, because without it, we're not going to, we'll just see corresponding cuts.
Great. And then another question we got, which I will take the first crack at, and then my colleagues can feel free to add. But the question was, what assistance will the federal government give to post-secondary institutions to help them keep students and staff safe? And then also, what standards will be recommended by the CDC and other health experts? Going back to just talking about the importance of stimulus funding for higher education institutions, we've definitely been advocating for more funding, more stimulus funding for institutions, and we'd like that funding to be as flexible as possible so that schools can use it to backfill lost revenue, but to also prepare for reopening and to be able to purchase, safety equipment and keep their students and themselves protected as they go back to school. Additionally, I'd like to point out that the CDC has issued a COVID-19 toolkit specifically for institutions of higher education. And it's pretty comprehensive. They update it regularly. And it also encourages higher education institutions to work with their local health department to just make sure that they're, that they have everything they need and they can be compliant with any regulations that are put out by their state or locality. So I'll stop there, and if my colleagues wanted to add anything. Okay, and then there was one question regarding the formula that Jihang, you talked about for the Senate Republicans bill, the HEALS Act. The 90%, 10% formula, there was a question about whether if the HEALS Act was passed and that formula was passed, would that formula apply to fall enrollment, or would it be pushed back to spring enrollment, or would it maybe be at the discretion of the department?
I believe the way that they created the formula was the 2018-19 school year. So therefore, it would be based upon the total Pell headcount, FTE. So that's how they derive it. It would be for the whole academic year. It wouldn't just be, for an example, for fall FY21, but it would be a period of time. I don't have the piece of legislation right in front of me, but Terry, we can definitely get that answer for you. I have your email.
Yeah, just to add to that, like it would not be this upcoming fall. It would be whatever information that the Department of Education has on file as most recent that they would utilize.
Okay, great. And then we have another question regarding stimulus. This question says, both heroes and heels seem to be the starting point for negotiations around stimulus 4. Do the contents of these bills change any of ACCT's priorities? What are the 3 to 4 biggest points we should bring up with our federal reps related to stimulus 4?
I guess I can answer that. Ryan, thank you for your answer, and hope you're doing well in California. For us, I think the 3 biggest asks on our end of the stick is that, one, we're asking for a robust allocation for higher education, and especially for public higher education, because the HEROES Act included a set aside for public institutions. So that's number 1. So we're asking for at least 46 billion, if not higher. We outlined 74 billion in our PowerPoint slide. Number 2, we're asking Congress to distribute those resources based upon a headcount formula versus an FTE formula. And that's to ensure that our part-time students are supported through this effort. And then number 3, our third ask is relative to job training. We just think that given the state of play right now that we have in this country, and community colleges in 2008, 2009, 2010 stepped up to the plate relative to the TAC grant and other job training or grant opportunities after the Great Recession. We know that a lot of institutions are interested in reinvigorating those programs, and we're asking for additional federal resources for those programs.
Okay, great. And then kind of a follow-up to that question, just drilling down a little bit more on the formula FTE versus headcount. There's a question. In the new stimulus bill, do you think the FTE instead of headcount component of the formula is set in stone, or is Congress still debating this? Jose, did you want to take that one?
Sure. It's definitely not set in stone. As Jihang mentioned, we've been doing a lot of strong advocacy on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers. Both HEROES and the Senate Democrats bills have used headcount, so it's still in play as they move through negotiations. The Senate Republican bill does not, but they still need to come to the table and coalesce around one compromise formula, which is why we're still asking and pushing for a headcount, because we know that there's still a fighting chance there.
Great, thanks, Jose. As of right now, I don't see any more questions that came through. So I don't know, Jihang, did you want to offer just any closing remarks, or Jose, any additional remarks?
I think there was a Congress-related one. I don't know if it's been answered yet.
Christina said she answered it via, she typed the answer.
Okay, great.
Yes, I would just say that, we continue to ask all of you to communicate with your legislators. I think it's crucial. The next 2 weeks, we're estimating that Congress will figure out their final resolution in the next 2 weeks or so. And it is crunch time for us to communicate the community college priorities to Capitol Hill. We are continuing to work with our colleagues at AACC on pushing all the various pieces of our priorities up, including the formula issue, but also just getting additional resources for our institutions. And we do know that given the state of play with state resources, we're trying to get all of you as much resources as possible, knowing that there's a lot of ambiguity regarding your enrollments for the fall, and then obviously enrollment issues relative to spring. And then furthermore, I would just give you an update for those of you who are trustees and presidents who are who typically attend our ACCT Leadership Congress. We have gone to virtual Congress. We'll be having essentially Congress will be for 2-week period of time. The different type of Congress, our Leadership Congress. The first week will be primarily for our board and committee activities and also our elections for our board and our Diversity and Equity Inclusion Committee. And then we'll also have that following subsequent week, we'll have 4 days of general sessions and concurrent sessions. And so therefore we look forward to seeing you or virtually at our annual meeting, and which will be in October. Do we have any additional questions that have come in?
I don't see any more.
Okay. Yes, you can go to Congress's, Christina's faster than I am. You can visit congress.acct.org to see the schedule and also to sign up for our Leadership Congress. And thank you again for joining us. I'll turn it over to our fearless chair-elect. Dave, are you there?
Oh, yes.
To give us any parting thoughts?
Well, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank you, Ji-Hang, and Katie and Jose for an excellent presentation. And as you said, I look forward to seeing as many of you as I can at our virtual Congress coming up in a few more weeks. So once again, thanks for all that valuable information. And I do look forward to our next live from DC, ACCT Live. So thank you all for attending, and stay safe in these trying times. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.